Of all the knives of history, the kukri is perhaps the most versatile. Larger than pretty much any other knife, the borderline short sword from the Himalayas has found its way into the conscience of the West as a fierce fighting weapon, equally adept at clearing brush as well as enemies. Well-known weapons have many modern reproductions, some good and others of poor quality, and the kukri is no different. The blade here is Deepeeka's special Assamee KUKRI, which you can buy on Cult of Athena for anywhere between $70 and $40 depending on the sale. For those of you who know much about modern sword producers, you'll know that Deepeeka is not known for its high quality or historical accuracy. That being said, their products are cheap, and even if they're not the best, they work. In this video, I will look at the product, show you some testing I did with it, and see what it's good for, as well as dive into the history of this legendary knife and explore its uses. So is Deepeeka's special Assamee KUKRI worth it? Watch this video to find out. Also remember to like, comment, and subscribe for more content so I can keep posting videos that you guys like. Also remember to click the bell to get notifications when I upload, since YouTube's algorithm isn't very kind to videos having to deal with weapons or the less PC yet still important parts of history. So first things first, what are the specs on this thing? The special Assamee KUKRI comes in at 17.5 inches long total, with a whole foot of that being taken up by the blade. The blade itself is 2.16 inches from spine to edge at its thickest, and as wide as 0.3 inches at the base, all made from EN45 high carbon steel. As you might imagine, this large knife is going to be relatively heavy, even with the two fullers on the blade, weighing in at 1.2 pounds. The kukri is pretty front heavy, which is expected, but with that heft comes a feeling of sturdiness and strength. Whether bushwhacking or getting through the zombie apocalypse, this knife can go all day, assuming your arm doesn't get tired. The scabbard of the knife is alright, with a brass tip on the outside and some sort of wooden paneling on the inside. The black leather is flashy, but the belt fastener moves up and down the scabbard, making it bounce around during use, and generally just feels insecure. The pommel is peened, but that's about where the compliments stop with that part of the knife. The handle, while functional, looks pretty shoddy. The brass ornaments are hideous, especially around the fasteners, and the so-called lion head on the pommel looks more like a deformed gummy bear. If you're getting this knife to be a beautiful addition to your knife collection, this is not the kukri for you. But looks aren't everything. But before we pass judgment on the special Assamee, let's look at the history of the kukri. I feel that many people, especially in the West, tend to assume that things from the more exotic places of the world are always very old. The first civilizations, after all, came from areas like the Middle East, China, and India. But while these regions are very old, they still evolved over time just like the rest of the world. The kukri is an example of this evolution. For a while, it was thought that the kukri had its roots in the Macedonian kopis, which came to the Himalayan region in the 2nd century BC with Alexander the Great. However, besides the shape of the blades being similar, there is no evidence that the kopis is an ancestor of the kukri. Rather, the kukri likely evolved for the fighting styles and needs of the Himalayan people. While we don't know exactly where the kukri comes from, it is thought by many experts that kukris came to Nepal from invading Indian forces during the 16th century. These kukris, or proto-kukris, tend to have a slightly longer, more slender blade, along with a longer handle. This design made early kukris more balanced and therefore faster to wield in a fight. In combat, kukris would be used in conjunction with a small buckler-like shield, known as a dal, and mostly used as a slashing weapon. Believe it or not, these knives would often be used by the Nepalese to hunt tigers. No spears or traps, just the kukri itself. Kukris, like most weapons, have a lot of variance in how they are built. Kukris varied in length and thickness, but generally they stay between 16 and 18 inches in length, although they can be shorter as well. The characteristic feature of the kukri is its blade. Featuring a forward curve with a thick, heavy belly, the design makes the knife an amazing cutter. In the 19th century, the kukri came to the attention of Europe. In November of 1814, the English invaded Nepal, where they came into contact with the region's warriors and their signature kukri blades. The fighting was very difficult for the British, especially early on, with one of the first commanders in the war being killed and another deserting, with others forced into inaction as a result of the difficulty of their situations. After 2 years of fighting, a treaty was signed whereby England took part of Nepal, but the country remained largely independent. More than that, however, the English were so impressed with Nepal's warriors and their fighting that a division of warriors dubbed the Gurkhas was created in the English Army and Indian Army later, which still exist to this day. Along with the Gurkhas came the kukri, and with time the blade developed even further. The peened construction of the hilt became standard practice and replaced a gluing method that was used earlier, and the knives tended to become thicker so as to double as brush clearing tools as well as weapons. The Gurkhas served the English well, especially in World War II. While serving in Tunisia, a famous report from a Gurkha division reads, "Enemy losses 10, ours nil. Ammunition expenditure nil." Other examples in the Pacific theater see Gurkhas killing Japanese soldiers with their kukris or fending off much larger groups of enemies. The kukri is still in use today, although it has largely been relegated to a bush cutter used by everyone from outdoorsmen to special forces operators. So, how does this Deepeeka special Assamee KUKRI stack up in terms of historical accuracy? Well, the first thing is the name. The Assamee KUKRI is named for the Assam region of India. Assam is on the southern edge of the eastern Himalayas and a couple hundred miles away from Nepal. Still, the Gurkha divisions famous for the English military actually came from across the Himalayas in northern India, and of course, so does the kukri. As for the size, everything here mostly checks out. Again, the kukri doesn't have any specific dimensions, but has a general profile which this knife fits into just fine. There are some finer points of issue here, and Matt Easton from School of Gladiatoria actually makes a video addressing this. The main issues with this kukri in terms of historical accuracy are issues with the blade and the hilt. These are minor complaints, but still worth mentioning in case you're looking for a kukri that has more historical accuracy. The most obvious flaw of this kukri is the lack of a notch at the bottom section of the blade. The use of this notch historically, which has a small protrusion in the middle of it, is unknown, although it is likely symbolic of either fertility or the Hindu deity Shiva. Some also believe it to be functional as a blood groove to keep blood from running down onto the handle, although I haven't really tested that one for myself. Looking at the spine, you can see here that the blade takes on an angular shape, with the first part of the blade being a straight line, then angling into another straight line for the other half of the blade. Most kukris, even during the World Wars, actually tended to keep a curve all the way through the spine of the knife, rather than an angle like a boomerang. The curve also extended into the hilt of the kukri as well, but as you can see here, the hilt on this kukri is mostly straight. To be fair, these kukris are made for a consumer base mostly in Europe and North America, and the average European person is a good amount larger than people from Nepal, especially historically. A straighter, longer hilt would be easier for a bigger person to grip, so I totally see why they did that. The hilt has one other issue, however, which is the size and shape of the pommel. The bottom of the kukri's handle on this model flares the tiniest bit out, which is under-exaggerated compared to other historical and even modern versions of the kukri. Since the kukri is made for slashing, one's hand tends to move down the hilt off the end when swinging a blade. The flaring at the end of the handle is supposed to prevent this, but the change on this particular model is too small for it to really make a difference. and it's the one historical inaccuracy that actually matters with use. So how does this kukri function? In terms of handling, the kukri is very front heavy, and that's not surprising given the blade. The small handle with a lack of a pommel sort of exaggerates this, as your hand can start to slide with nothing to stop it. The fact that the blade is made out of wood and the swelling in the middle doesn't help that much makes this even more obvious. Stabbing has a different issue, as the lack of a crossguard lets your hand slip up onto the handle. This of course is an issue with every kukri, not just this one. Fortunately, the bottom inch or so of the blade where the traditional notch would be isn't sharpened, so you have some wiggle room. With all the heft, of course, comes an amazing ability to cut. The blade is very heavy and has no problem cutting through or even stabbing through anything I threw at it. Overall, this is one of my favorite weapons I have to cut with, since it's more compact than a machete, but still does just as much damage. In terms of fighting, the kukri is mostly designed for slashing, and the shield that it was historically used in tandem with helps facilitate this, covering the user as they wind the blade up more for a stronger cut. Stabbing is obviously a use as well, although it's not nearly as good as other knives, such as the cold steel rondelle dagger that I also have a review on. The kukri is a slower knife, so playing the distance game is this knife's greatest advantage. Given that the blade is also much longer than most, keeping a reach advantage isn't too hard. Ultimately though, I feel that a kukri isn't the best fighting knife, mostly just given its slowness, although it is by no means a slouch of a blade. So, what's the practical application of this kukri? For the most part, I'd say that it's just having fun. Obviously, it can be used as a weapon or a tool, and there's nothing wrong with it on those fronts, but there are just so many things that serve that role better for around the same price. If you're looking for a larger, heavier kukri with a bit of a traditional decoration on it,